Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. And today we're tackling something that's both exciting and a little bit unnerving in the world of AI. It's called model collapse. And it basically boils down to this question. Could we be running out of the data that powers those amazing AI tools we all keep hearing about?
That's the big question a lot of folks are asking. And it's interesting you use the word unnerving because, yeah, it does kind of feel like we're staring down a potential crisis.
Right, like we're so used to AI getting smarter all the time.
Yeah.
But what if that progress hits a wall? To set the stage for everyone, just a super quick recap, generative AI is the tech behind things like ChatGPT. It can write poems, translate languages, even compose music. And it does all this by learning from massive amounts of data.
Exactly. Think of data as the fuel for the AI engine. The more high-quality data you feed it, the better it performs.
So what you're saying is the AI is like a super smart but very hungry student.
Yes.
It needs to keep consuming information to keep learning.
That's a great analogy. And just like a student who's crammed for too many tests in a row, there's a chance the AI could hit a point of diminishing returns.
Okay, now that's where things start to get a little scary. So are we literally talking about running out of data, like there's a finite amount of information out there, and once it's gone, it's gone?
Well, it's not quite that simple, but there is a limit to the amount of high-quality human-created data out there. And remember, it's that human-created data that...
Right, I get it. So if we're constantly feeding the AI the same stuff over and over again, eventually it's not going to learn anything new.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of model collapse comes in. It's a term coined in a recent research paper that's been making waves in the AI community.
2026.
Yeah.
That's just a couple of years away. So what happens then? Do all our fancy AI tools just go kaput?
Well, it's not necessarily a sudden shutdown, but the concern is that the quality of AI output could start to degrade. As the AI is trained on data that's increasingly polluted with synthetic content, it's a bit like making a copy of a copy of a copy.
Like when you keep photocopying a document and it gets all blurry and faded.
Exactly. And the AI might start repeating itself, generating less coherent text, or even losing its ability to perform certain tasks.
So it's like the AI is slowly losing its mind, going through some kind of digital dementia.
That's a vivid way to put it. And the scary part is this model collapse could happen in stages, starting with subtle declines in performance and eventually leading to a more profound loss of capability.
Okay, so if we're potentially facing a data drought, what are the options? Are we just doomed to watch our AI tools get dumber over time?
Not necessarily. There are a few ideas being explored. One is to use synthetic data to train future AIs. Essentially, it's like having a robot write a textbook for another robot to study.
That sounds a little circular.
Mm.
Like, wouldn't the AI just be learning from itself? Could that actually work?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's one of the big debates happening right now in the AI world. There's a real concern that relying solely on synthetic data could exacerbate this model collapse problem.
I can see why. Remember that game Telephone where a message gets passed down a line and ends up completely garbled? It feels like the same thing could happen with AI if it's just learning from itself over and over again.
That's a great analogy, and that's exactly what some researchers are worried about, this idea of a recursive loop where the AI is essentially feeding on its own exhaust.
Okay, so synthetic data is a bit of a gamble, but is there anything else we can do? I mean, we can't just stop using AI altogether, can we?
Of course not. AI is already too integrated into our lives, and it has the potential to do so much good. But we need to be smart about how we develop and deploy it, and that includes being aware of the potential risks like this model collapse issue.
So it's like we're at a crossroads. We have this incredibly powerful technology, but we need to figure out how to use it sustainably without running into a dead end.
That's a great way to put it. And that's what we'll be exploring in more depth as we continue this deep dive into the world of AI and model collapse. Stay tuned.
This is getting really interesting. We're just scratching the surface here, but it's already clear that the future of AI is going to be a wild ride. Before we get into the potential solutions, though, I want to understand this model collapse thing a little better. Like, how would we even know it's happening? What are the warning signs?
That's a great question, and it's something that researchers are actively studying. One of the early signs of model collapse is a decrease in the AI's ability to generate novel content.
So instead of coming up with new ideas or expressions, the AI starts to get repetitive, like it's stuck in a creative rut.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning. In later stages of model collapse, the AI's output could become less coherent or even nonsensical, and eventually it could lose the ability to perform specific tasks altogether.
Yikes. Doesn't sound good. It's like the AI is slowly losing its grip on reality.
In a way, yes. And the scary part is that this process could be gradual, so we might not even realize it's happening until it's too late.
So what can we do? Is there any way to prevent this model collapse or at least slow it down?
That's what we're going to explore next. But before we get into the potential solutions, I want to touch on another important aspect of this whole data issue, and that's the concept of data pollution.
Data pollution. Is that like when my inbox is full of spam?
You got it.
So,
As more and more AI-generated content floods the internet, it becomes harder and harder to find original human-created content.
right. So if we're training future AIs on data sets that are increasingly polluted with this synthetic stuff, won't that just make the model collapse problem even worse?
Exactly. It's like a vicious cycle. The more we rely on AI to create content, the less human-created content there is to train future AIs on, and the faster we head towards this potential model collapse.
Wow. So it's like we're trapped in this AI echo chamber where everything starts to sound the same.
Oh, that's a good way to think about it. And it highlights the importance of finding ways to balance the use of synthetic data with the preservation of high-quality human-created content.
Okay. So it's clear that we need to be careful about how we manage this whole data situation.
Mhm.
But even if we avoid the worst case scenario of model collapse, there's still the question of who controls the data and the AI that's trained on it.
You're hitting on a really important point. There's a lot of discussion right now about the potential for AI to become concentrated in the hands of a few powerful companies.
So are we talking about like an AI oligopoly where a handful of tech giants control all the best AI tools?
It's a possibility, and it's something that we need to be mindful of as we move forward with AI development. There are a lot of ethical and societal implications to consider.
Definitely. Like who gets access to these powerful AI tools? And how do we ensure that they're used for good rather than for harm?
Those are the big questions, and there are no easy answers. But it's a conversation that we need to have. And it's a conversation that's going to involve everyone, not just the tech companies, but policymakers, researchers, and the public at large.
This is getting pretty deep. I'm starting to feel like we're on the verge of a major societal shift with all this AI stuff.
I think you're right. And that's what makes this whole discussion so fascinating and important. We're not just talking about technology anymore. We're talking about the future of humanity.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential risks of AI and this whole model collapse thing. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to end on a slightly more optimistic note. Are there any glimmers of hope on the horizon?
There are, and that's what we'll delve into next. We'll explore some of the exciting developments in AI research that could offer solutions to these challenges and maybe even lead to a brighter future for AI and for all of us.
I'm definitely ready for some good news after all that doom and gloom. But before we get into the potential solutions, I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier, this idea that some companies might have a first mover advantage in the AI race.
Oh, absolutely. The companies that are already training their AI models on the vast amounts of data available today, they have a head start.
So it's like they're getting their AI a full buffet while everyone else is still waiting in line. But wouldn't they still eventually need to retrain their AI on newer data? And as we've discussed, that data could be increasingly polluted by synthetic content.
That's the dilemma. They have this initial advantage, but how do they maintain it as the data landscape shifts? It's like building a sandcastle close to the tide line. They need to figure out a way to either move the castle or stop the tide.
So what can these first movers, and everyone else for that matter, do to avoid getting swept away? Is there any hope?
There is, and that's what we'll explore next.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. And before the break, we were getting kind of deep into the weeds with all this talk about model collapse and synthetic data. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, and honestly, it can feel pretty overwhelming sometimes, especially when you start thinking about all the potential consequences.
Right. Like what happens if our AI tools start getting dumber over time? It's kind of a mind-bending concept. But you mentioned there's hope. So let's dig into that. What are some of the things that researchers are working on to try to prevent this model collapse from happening?
Well, there are a few different approaches being explored, and one of the most promising areas of research is focused on improving the quality of synthetic data itself.
Okay, so instead of just throwing any old synthetic data at the AI,
Right.
we're trying to be more selective, more discerning about what we feed it.
Exactly. It's kind of like with human learning. You wouldn't expect a student to learn complex concepts from poorly written textbooks or unreliable sources.
Right. You want to make sure they're getting information that's accurate, well-structured, and engaging. So how do we do that with synthetic data? How do we make sure it's high quality?
One approach is to use reinforcement learning techniques to basically reward AI models for generating content that's diverse, novel, and relevant.
So it's like we're training the AI to be more creative, more original in its thinking.
Exactly. And another approach is to incorporate human feedback into the training process. So instead of just letting the AI run wild, we have humans acting as editors, providing guidance and corrections.
So it's like having a teacher or a mentor guiding the AI's learning.
That's a great way to think about it. The idea is to leverage human expertise and intuition to help the AI produce higher quality output.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about all the bad synthetic data that's already out there? Can't that still contaminate the training sets for future AIs?
Absolutely. That's why researchers are also developing tools to detect and filter out low-quality synthetic data. It's like having a spam filter for AI training sets.
So we're basically trying to weed out the junk, the digital noise that could mislead or confuse the AI.
Exactly. The goal is to create a cleaner, more reliable data set for AI training.
But even with these tools, how can we be sure we're catching all the bad data? It seems like a bit of a cat and mouse game where the people creating the bad data might always be one step ahead.
It's a valid concern, and it highlights the need for ongoing research and vigilance. But there's another strategy that's being explored, which might be even more promising, and that's using AI to monitor AI.
Wait, hold on. You're saying we could use AI to police itself? How does that even work?
Essentially, researchers are developing algorithms that can analyze the output of generative AI models and look for early signs of degradation.
So it's like having a digital watchdog keeping an eye on its own kind.
Exactly. These algorithms would look for things like a decrease in the novelty of the generated content or an increase in repetitive patterns.
So the AI starts showing signs of model collapse. The algorithm would basically sound the alarm.
Precisely. And that would give us an opportunity to intervene and try to correct the problem before it gets out of hand.
But then what? What do we do once we've detected the problem?
That's where human intervention comes in. If an AI model is showing signs of degradation, we might need to adjust its training data, fine-tune its parameters, or even start over with a fresh model.
So even with all these fancy algorithms and AI watchdogs, we still need humans in the loop. It seems like humans are always going to play a critical role in shaping and guiding AI development.
Absolutely. We can't just set these AI systems loose and expect them to figure everything out on their own. We need to be actively involved in their development and deployment, making sure that they're aligned with our values and goals.
That makes sense. But it also raises another question. You mentioned earlier that companies training their AI models right now have a first mover advantage. But what does that really mean in the long run? Are we headed towards an AI oligopoly, where a handful of companies control the most powerful AI tools?
That's a question that a lot of people are asking, and it's hard to predict with certainty, but it's definitely a concern. There's a potential for the companies with the most resources and data to create AI models that are significantly more advanced than anything else out there.
So we can end up with a situation where a few tech giants have a monopoly on the best AI technology.
It's possible, but there are also some reasons to be optimistic.
Oh, like what?
Well, for one thing, the open source community is incredibly active in the field of AI. There are a lot of talented researchers and developers who are working on creating and sharing open source AI tools and datasets.
So it's like a counter movement to the potential AI oligopoly, where the power of open source could help to democratize access to AI technology.
Exactly. The idea is to make sure that AI isn't just controlled by a select few, but that it's accessible to everyone who wants to use it and contribute to its development.
I like that. But even if we can prevent an AI oligopoly, there's still the question of how we ensure that AI is developed and used ethically and responsibly. We've seen a lot of concerns about AI bias, about the potential for AI to be used for harmful purposes. How do we address those concerns, especially in the context of this model collapse thing we've been talking about?
You're hitting on one of the most important aspects of this whole AI discussion. It's not just about the technology itself, it's about how we use it and the values that we embed in it.
So we need to make sure that AI is aligned with our ethical principles.
Exactly. And that's going to require a lot of careful thought and collaboration. We need to involve ethicists, social scientists, policymakers, and the public at large in this conversation.
Sounds like we're talking about a whole new way of thinking about technology and its role in society.
I think you're right. We're entering uncharted territory here, and we need to be prepared to adapt and evolve as we learn more about the capabilities and limitations of AI.
Well, this conversation has definitely given me a lot to think about. I'm starting to realize that AI is so much more than just a cool new gadget. It has the potential to fundamentally change the way we live, work, and interact with the world.
I agree. And it's up to all of us to ensure that those changes are positive and beneficial for everyone.
Well said. So we've talked about the potential risks of AI and some of the ways we might be able to mitigate those risks. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to shift gears and focus on some of the potential solutions and breakthroughs that could help us avoid this whole model collapse scenario altogether.
Sounds good to me. Let's dive in.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time talking about what could go wrong with AI, but I'm really curious to hear more about those glimmers of hope you mentioned. What are some of the breakthroughs that could change the game and lead us towards a more positive AI future?
Well, one really exciting area of research is focused on developing new types of AI models that are more resilient to model collapse. Instead of just trying to fix the existing models, we're building new ones from the ground up.
Oh, wow. So it's like instead of patching up an old car, we're designing a brand new engine. What makes these new models so different?
One key difference is that they're designed to be more robust to variations in the training data. You know how we talked about data pollution and the potential for synthetic data to mess things up? Well, these new models are being built with that in mind.
So they're like tougher, more adaptable AIs that can handle a bit of rough data without falling apart.
That's a good way to put it. They're designed to be less sensitive to noise and inconsistencies in the data, which should make them less prone to model collapse.
That's encouraging. But even if we can create these super resilient AI models, what about the data itself? We've talked a lot about the limitations of synthetic data. Are there any alternatives out there?
Yeah, there are some really interesting new approaches to data generation that could revolutionize how we train AI models. One idea that's gaining traction is using simulated environments to generate training data.
Simulated environments, like
Yeah.
you mean video games or something.
Exactly. Imagine creating a virtual world that mimics real-world scenarios and interactions. You could use that simulated environment to generate tons of training data for your AI models.
So it's like building a custom-made data factory for AI training. What's the advantage of that?
Well, one big advantage is that you have complete control over the data generation process. You can design the simulated environment to be as diverse and representative as you want, and you can even introduce specific challenges to test the AI's abilities.
That sounds incredibly powerful. It's like having a tailor-made training ground for your AI. But are these simulated environments really realistic enough to produce useful data? I mean, can an AI really learn about the real world from a simulation?
That's a great question. And the answer is it depends on how well the simulation is designed. The goal is to create simulated environments that are as close to reality as possible so that the AI models trained on that data can generalize to real-world situations.
So it's like training an astronaut for a space mission by putting them through simulations that mimic the challenges of space.
Precisely. And the more realistic we can make those simulated environments, the more confident we can be that the AI will be prepared for the real deal.
That makes a lot of sense. But creating these super realistic simulations sounds like a massive undertaking. Who's working on this stuff?
It's a collaborative effort involving researchers from all over academia, industry, government agencies. There's a real buzz around this approach, and a lot of smart people are working on it.
This is really fascinating stuff. It sounds like we're on the verge of a whole new era in AI development, where we're not just limited to real-world data anymore. We can create our own virtual worlds to train and test these AIs.
That's exactly right. It's a really exciting time to be working in AI because the possibilities are just exploding.
It really does feel like we're standing at the edge of something big.
Yeah.
But even with all these advancements, I keep coming back to this question. What about human creativity? If we're relying more and more on AI to generate content, write music, create art, what does that mean for human artists and creators?
That's a really profound question, and honestly, I don't think anyone has a definitive answer yet. But here's what I believe. I think AI will always be a tool that can enhance and amplify human creativity. It can help us push the boundaries of what's possible, but I don't think it will ever fully replace human creativity.
So it's not about AI versus humans. It's more about finding ways for AI and humans to work together.
Exactly. The real magic will happen when we find ways to combine the power and efficiency of AI with the unique insights, emotions, and experiences of human creators.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. It sounds like the future of AI doesn't have to be this dystopian scenario where robots take over and humans become obsolete. It could be something much more collaborative and enriching.
I agree. I think AI has the potential to be an incredible force for good in the world, but it's up to us to ensure that it's used responsibly and ethically, and that we never lose sight of the human element.
Well said. This has been an incredible conversation, really eye-opening. I've learned so much about the potential risks and rewards of AI, and I'm honestly feeling a lot more optimistic about the future now.
I'm glad to hear that. It's important to remember that the future of AI is not predetermined. It's something that we're all creating together right now through the choices we make and the actions we take.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about the values and the vision that we bring to it.
Exactly. And if we can approach AI with a sense of curiosity, compassion, and a commitment to using it for the betterment of humanity, then I think we can create a future where AI truly empowers us all.
That's a great note to end on. This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the world of AI, and I want to thank you for sharing your insights and expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all of you listening out there, thank you for joining us on this journey. I hope you've learned as much as I have. And remember, the future of AI is in our hands.